Hong Kong, December 1941. The city still shimmered under British rule, a colonial jewel built on trade, ambition, and fragile peace. But beneath its skyline of masts and neon, war was coming. Across the waters to the north, the Empire of Japan prepared to strike, its armies hardened by years of conquest in China, its ambition stretching across all of Asia. The people of Hong Kong felt the tension in the air. They had heard the whispers from Shanghai and Nanjing, the brutality, the lightning speed of Japan's war machine. Yet life continued as if denial could keep the world from collapsing. British officers still dined at the Peninsula Hotel, their uniforms pressed and polished. Local merchants still sold tea and silk at the markets. But in the distance, the clouds were gathering. On December 7, 1941, while the world reeled from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched their offensive on Hong Kong. The assault began before dawn, with shells raining down on the border defenses along the new territories. The defenders, a patchwork of British, Canadian, Indian, and Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps units, were badly outnumbered and poorly equipped. Commanded by Major General Christopher Maltby, they had little more than 14,000 troops to face nearly 50,000 Japanese soldiers under General Sakai Takashi. From the very first hour, it was clear this would not be a fair fight. The Japanese artillery was relentless. Their bombers struck Kai Tak Airport, destroying the colony's few aircraft before they could even take off. The skies filled with smoke and flame. Anti-aircraft gunners fired desperately, their shells bursting against a backdrop of black clouds and burning fuel. Civilians fled through the streets, clutching children and what little they could carry. The defenders pulled back from the mainland positions, unable to withstand the pounding. The Gin Drinkers Line, a series of concrete bunkers stretching across the Kowloon Peninsula, had been touted by British command as the Maginot Line of the East. It was supposed to hold for weeks. It lasted just 2 days. Japanese troops breached it with ruthless efficiency, scaling cliffs and attacking through fog-shrouded ravines. The British and Indian defenders fought bravely, but were overwhelmed. By December 12th, the situation was desperate. Maltby ordered a full withdrawal from Kowloon to Hong Kong Island. Soldiers crossed under cover of darkness, ferried across Victoria Harbour as fires burned behind them. The skyline of Kowloon glowed red with destruction. As the boats reached the island's shore, one officer looked back and whispered, "There goes the mainland." It was the first step toward the inevitable. Civilians on Hong Kong Island could no longer escape. The Japanese had complete control of the skies. Bombs fell daily, shattering hospitals, power plants, and homes. The once bustling streets of Central became trenches of rubble. Refugees crowded into air raid shelters, praying for dawn. Food grew scarce. Fear became constant. Still, the defenders prepared for the siege. Along Wong Nai Chung Gap and Mount Butler, British engineers reinforced bunkers. Canadian troops from the Winnipeg Grenadiers and the Royal Rifles of Canada dug in, their faces hard with determination. Many of them had arrived only weeks before the invasion, untested in battle, yet now they were expected to defend a colony doomed from the start. Across the harbour, Japanese artillery positioned itself on the captured hills of Kowloon. They could see every street, every fortification on Hong Kong Island. The bombardment began on December 16th. Shells screamed across the water, smashing into government buildings and military posts. The island shook under continuous fire. Soldiers tried to rest between barrages, their nerves stretched to breaking point. Inside the governor's residence, Sir Mark Aitchison Young struggled to maintain order. Communications with London were intermittent, supplies were dwindling, and reinforcements were impossible. Churchill had already declared that Hong Kong could not be saved. The garrison was to fight to the utmost, a command that meant one thing: there would be no rescue, no surrender, until the last bullet was fired. On December 18th, the Japanese began their amphibious assault on the island. Under the cover of darkness, small boats crossed the harbor, searchlights swept the waves, tracers streaked the night. The defenders opened fire, but the Japanese landed in force near North Point and Taiku Dockyard, quickly establishing beachheads. Grenades exploded through the rain, bayonets flashed in the firelight. House by house, hill by hill, the battle for Hong Kong Island began. Civilians were trapped in the chaos. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded. The Matilda Hospital on the western slopes was bombed despite its Red Cross markings. Nurses carried the dying down smoke-filled corridors, their white uniforms stained red. Panic spread as Japanese troops advanced deeper into the city. Stories of atrocities began to surface: executions, looting, and the killing of prisoners. Still, the defenders refused to collapse. The Royal Scots, the Middlesex Regiment, and the Canadians fought back ferociously. At Wong Nai Chung Gap, small groups of men held out for days against overwhelming odds, their machine guns cutting down wave after wave of attackers. Every inch of ground was paid for in blood. As the days passed, Hong Kong became a city under siege. Water supplies were cut, ammunition dwindled. The Japanese artillery never stopped. From the bombed-out harbor to the hills above Happy Valley, the defenders were exhausted but unbroken. They fought not for victory but for time, for honor, for one another. The Pearl of the Orient had become a battlefield, and its light was fading fast. The first light of December 18th revealed a city transformed. Hong Kong Island, once vibrant with markets, tramcars, and colonial life, now lay under a pall of smoke and fire. From Victoria Peak to the harbor, the air smelled of gunpowder and burning timber. Japanese artillery had reduced streets and homes to rubble, and the cries of civilians mingled with the staccato of machine guns. The defenders, British, Canadian, Indian, and local volunteer corps, held their positions on the ridges and slopes above the city, but for every yard they retained, the cost was measured in blood. At Wong Nai Chung Gap, the narrow defile connecting the north and south of the island, a small contingent of Canadians and British troops dug in behind hastily erected barricades. The terrain favored defense, but it could not stop the waves of Japanese infantry, supported by tanks that had rolled across the breached Kowloon line. Grenades exploded against sandbags, bullets shredded the walls of bunkers. In the chaos, some soldiers fell to their knees, firing wildly, trying to slow the inevitable. Others stood their ground, calm, focused, determined that if they were to die, they would die fighting. On the northern shore, Japanese landing parties surged forward, their boats cutting through the surf under cover of darkness. Searchlights caught the first waves of attackers, and the defenders unleashed a torrent of fire. Rifles cracked, mortars thundered, and the defenders' cries mingled with the screams of the wounded. Still the Japanese pressed on, climbing hills, sweeping through trenches, forcing each defender into brutal close-quarters combat. Bayonets clashed, knives flashed. Men who had been accountants, teachers, or students weeks before were now soldiers on the knife edge of life and death. The streets of Central became an urban battlefield. Civilians huddled in basements as bombs demolished their homes. Families ran from block to block, carrying children, shouting warnings, praying for safety. Hospitals overflowed with the injured. Nurses and doctors moved through shattered corridors, their white uniforms smeared with blood, tending to soldiers and civilians alike. The enemy's advance was relentless. Buildings once considered safe were destroyed by artillery. A Red Cross hospital at Happy Valley was bombed, and screams filled the corridors as fire and rubble consumed all in its path. Despite the mounting pressure, the defenders refused to surrender. Major General Maltby coordinated his forces from behind the lines, issuing orders, rallying the troops, and maintaining morale as best he could. Every message sent or received was precious. Every order carried the weight of life and death. Communications with London were infrequent, reinforcing the sense that the colony had been left to fend for itself. And in truth, reinforcements would never come. Hong Kong had become a sacrificial outpost in a vast theatre of war. On December 19th, the Japanese made a decisive push through Wong Nai Chung Gap. The gap was crucial. Control of it meant dominance over the heart of the island. Small groups of defenders held back the attackers with grenades and machine guns, but the sheer numbers of the Japanese forces were overwhelming. Fighting became hand-to-hand in the narrow defiles. Men screamed as bayonets met flesh. Some soldiers fought until they had no ammunition left, then wielded knives and tools. The once pristine hills were now scarred with craters and blood-soaked earth. Canadian regiments, including the Royal Rifles of Canada and the Winnipeg Grenadiers, bore the brunt of the fighting. They had been brought halfway across the world to defend an empire they barely knew. Yet their resolve was unbreakable. In desperate counterattacks they recaptured key positions, only to be pushed back again. The streets of Wan Chai and Causeway Bay became rivers of mud, blood, and shattered glass as the defenders struggled to delay the enemy advance. Meanwhile, Japanese artillery continued to rain devastation from the north. Shells tore through rooftops, flattened buildings, and ignited fires that spread rapidly in the densely packed city. Civilians were trapped, unable to flee the path of the advancing army. Children and the elderly were carried through the ruins by exhausted parents. Hospitals were bombed repeatedly, their Red Cross symbols ignored. Fear became constant. Hunger gnawed at the population, and water grew scarce as supply lines were cut. By December 22nd, the situation was dire. The defenders had been pushed back into a shrinking perimeter on the north side of the island. The Japanese had captured key positions and were pressing toward the central urban areas. Morale was faltering, yet the troops fought on, determined to resist the invaders to the last. Officers circulated among the men, distributing what little ammunition remained, encouraging soldiers to hold their ground. It was a war of attrition fought on a city-scale battlefield, with every street, hill, and building contested fiercely. The civilians who survived endured constant terror. They scavenged what they could, hid in basements and tunnels, and prayed for nightfall to bring even temporary reprieve. But the night offered no safety. Japanese patrols prowled the streets, rounding up suspected collaborators or any civilians caught in crossfire. Homes and businesses were looted, and entire neighborhoods burned. The cries of the wounded and the dying were ever present, a reminder that no one, soldier or civilian, would escape unscathed. Amid this inferno, small acts of heroism shone through. Soldiers shared rations with starving civilians. Nurses risked sniper fire to carry the wounded to safety. Officers refused to abandon positions even when ordered to retreat, understanding that their presence inspired the men below. Letters were written in secret, often never sent, telling loved ones back home that they had done their duty. Every act was a tiny defiance, a testament to human endurance amidst the overwhelming machinery of war. As the Japanese tightened their grip, the defenders prepared for the inevitable. The British governor, Sir Mark Aitchison Young, realized that further resistance would lead only to needless slaughter. Supplies were nearly exhausted. The wounded could not be evacuated. The city was on the brink of collapse. He faced a decision no commander ever wants, whether to surrender to save lives, knowing it meant surrendering the colony itself. By Christmas Eve, the defenders held only the final perimeter around central and the southern hills. The Japanese artillery had destroyed what remained of the city's infrastructure. Water, food, and medicine were nearly gone. The soldiers who had fought for 2 weeks were exhausted, their bodies and minds pushed past the limit. Civilians, too, were reduced to shadows of their former selves, walking through ruins, clutching children, staring at the horizon with hollow eyes. On December 25th, under the cover of a tense silence broken only by distant shelling, the decision was made. The British governor and Major General Maltby met to discuss surrender. They knew that further resistance would only lead to the complete annihilation of both soldiers and civilians. The once proud colony, the Pearl of the Orient, was lost. The empire had fallen back, leaving the rising sun to claim victory. As the Japanese flags rose over the government buildings, the defenders laid down their arms. The soldiers had fought with courage, honor, and unrelenting resolve, but they were now prisoners of war. Many would be shipped to camps in Japan or the Philippines, where starvation, forced labor, and disease awaited. Civilians were left to the mercy of the occupiers, some subjected to atrocities that would scar Hong Kong for decades. The siege had lasted only 17 days, but its impact was immeasurable. It was the first major Allied defeat in the Pacific, a harsh lesson in the speed, coordination, and ruthlessness of Japanese warfare. Yet Christmas 1941 dawned over Hong Kong, but there was no peace, no festivity, only the acrid smell of smoke and the distant thunder of artillery. The colony, once bustling with markets, trams, and the chatter of everyday life, had become a charnel house. Buildings lay in ruin, streets were rivers of mud and debris, and civilians moved like shadows through the skeletal remains of their homes. For the defenders, this was not a holiday, it was the brink of annihilation. By December 24th, the Japanese had seized control of the northern hills and most of the strategic positions on the island. Wong Nai Chung Gap, the critical pass connecting the north and south, had been lost. The Canadian units, the Royal Rifles of Canada, and the Winnipeg Grenadiers were decimated. Survivors regrouped in the southern defences, battered, exhausted, and hungry. Their uniforms were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and blood. Yet despite the hopelessness, they fought on, driven by honor, camaraderie, and a sense that surrender was unthinkable until the last possible moment. Throughout the city, civilians endured unimaginable terror. Hospitals overflowed, and makeshift clinics were set up in basements and temples. Nurses carried the wounded through rubble-strewn streets, dodging sniper fire and shrapnel. Families huddled in the shadows, praying their homes would survive another shelling. Food was nearly gone, water was scarce, fear was constant, a weight pressing on everyone's chest. Children, some too young to understand the war, screamed as their parents dragged them through the ruins. In the early hours of December 25th, Japanese forces launched a final push. Infantry swarmed the southern ridges and the urban heart of Central. Artillery shells tore through streets and alleys, flattening buildings, igniting fires that spread across neighborhoods. The defenders, British, Indian, Canadian, and Hong Kong Volunteer Corps, met them with relentless determination. Machine guns raked advancing troops, rifles cracked from windows and barricades, and grenades erupted in alleys. Every inch of ground was contested. Every position gained by the enemy was paid for in blood. The Canadians fought with desperate courage. Soldiers clung to the last fortifications, repelling repeated assaults. Major John Osborne of the Winnipeg Grenadiers led a small counterattack through a shell-blasted street, rallying his men with a calm determination that belied the chaos. But for every position they reclaimed, Japanese forces returned with greater numbers, relentless and methodical. The urban landscape had become a maze of death, every building a trap, every street a killing ground. At Wongnai Chung Gap, small groups of defenders held out to the last. Snipers fired from shattered windows, and machine gun nests cut down anyone who approached. The Japanese pressed on with bayonets and flamethrowers, torching bunkers and trenches. Men who had survived the bombardments now faced hand-to-hand combat. The screams of the dying mingled with explosions and gunfire. There were no victories here, only desperate resistance. Civilians bore witness to unimaginable atrocities. Japanese soldiers swept through streets, executing anyone suspected of aiding the defenders. Hospitals were bombed despite their neutrality. The air was filled with smoke, the smell of burning wood and flesh. Women carried children through alleys strewn with rubble, often witnessing the deaths of neighbors and friends. Some hid for hours in basements, listening as the sounds of fighting passed above them, praying for dawn that would not bring relief. Meanwhile, Major General Maltby and Governor Young faced the grim reality of surrender. Ammunition was exhausted, food supplies gone, medical facilities overwhelmed. Their troops were shattered, casualties mounting with every hour. Civilians faced starvation and terror. To continue fighting would mean total annihilation. They met in the government house to discuss their grim options. Their hearts were heavy. The Empire had given them orders to resist, but reality had rendered such orders impossible. By midday, the decision was made. British forces would surrender to prevent further unnecessary slaughter. Word was passed through the ranks. Soldiers who had survived artillery, urban combat, and hand-to-hand fighting lowered their weapons, faces etched with exhaustion and grief. Their surrender did not come with relief. It came with the weight of failure, though none could question the courage they had displayed. The Japanese accepted the surrender formally at the north end of Central. Soldiers marched in columns through the streets, weary but dignified. They were disarmed and collected into holding areas under the watch of their captors. Prisoners faced grim fates. Many were sent to camps in Japan or the Philippines, subjected to forced labor, starvation, and disease. Civilians were left under occupation, vulnerable to looting, execution, and forced labor. The city, once vibrant and cosmopolitan, was now a place of fear and silence. For those who had fought, the memories of Christmas 1941 would never fade. The Canadians, British, Indian, and local volunteers remembered their comrades who had fallen, the streets soaked with blood, the echoing screams, and the relentless advance of the Japanese. Officers kept diaries and wrote letters to loved ones, many of which would never be sent. Every act of defiance, every moment of bravery became part of the legend of Hong Kong's last stand. Among civilians, stories of courage and resilience persisted. Families shared food where little existed. Strangers protected one another from Japanese patrols. Nurses and doctors continued to work in bombed-out clinics, tending the wounded and dying despite exhaustion and fear. Children learned to navigate ruins, to hide in shadows, and to survive when survival itself seemed impossible. These acts were small, but in the midst of devastation, they were monumental. The Japanese occupation began immediately. Looting, executions, and terror marked their rule. Yet the defenders' resistance had left a mark. For 2 weeks, Hong Kong had not fallen quietly. It had not yielded without a fight. And while the city itself would endure under occupation, the spirit of the defenders lived on, a testament to courage against overwhelming odds. In the streets of Central, the echoes of that December still lingered. Soldiers and civilians alike had faced the brink, and some had crossed it. Their courage, their defiance, and their suffering would be remembered in diaries, letters, and oral histories. Hong Kong's defenders had fought with valor, even as the rising sun claimed victory. By the end of December 25th, Hong Kong had fallen. The battle was over, but the scars it left, physical, emotional, and cultural, would last for generations. Families were torn apart, soldiers were imprisoned, and the city's once vibrant streets were silent under occupation, yet within that silence lived the memory of bravery, endurance, and sacrifice. The defenders of Hong Kong, outnumbered and outgunned, had given everything to hold an empire's last outpost in the east. The city would survive eventually, but the story of Christmas 1941 would forever remain a dark, unforgettable chapter in World War II. It was a tale of courage in the face of hopelessness, of human spirit tested against the machinery of war, and of the price paid for honor and duty. Prisoners of war, numbering in the thousands, were rounded up and marched into captivity. British, Canadian, Indian, and local soldiers were sent to camps in Hong Kong itself or transported to Japan and other parts of occupied Asia. The journey was brutal. Men were crammed into transport ships, standing in filth and darkness for days. Disease spread quickly. Hunger gnawed at every stomach. Beatings were common, inflicted without warning or reason. Some did not survive the voyage. Others emerged broken in body or spirit. Civilians bore their own suffering under the occupation. Japanese soldiers patrolled every street, enforcing curfews, rounding up suspected dissidents, and exacting brutal reprisals. Looting and arson were widespread. Hospitals were commandeered or destroyed. Families were separated. Children hid in basements or warehouses, learning the art of survival far too early. Food was scarce. Water was rationed. Fear was constant. The once vibrant cosmopolitan city had become a landscape of terror and silence. Among the survivors were nurses, doctors, and volunteers who had refused to abandon the wounded. They continued their work despite danger, carrying patients through rubble-strewn alleys and making improvised clinics in temples and basements. Their courage became legendary. Even in the darkest hours, acts of kindness persisted, sharing of food, whispered encouragements, and secret efforts to hide the vulnerable from Japanese patrols. Humanity endured amid the devastation. For the British command, the fall of Hong Kong was a bitter pill. Major General Christopher Maltby and Governor Mark Aitchison Young were taken prisoner, along with their forces. In captivity, they witnessed the cruelty of the Japanese system, where discipline and brutality were enforced with ruthless efficiency. Yet even behind barbed wire, they maintained a sense of duty and responsibility for their men. Letters, diaries, and recollections from these officers would later provide a chilling and detailed account of the human cost of Hong Kong's last stand. The Japanese occupation was swift and uncompromising. Martial law was declared. Propaganda spread to control the population. Education was restricted. Cultural symbols of British rule were erased. Streets and buildings were renamed. The Union Jack, once proudly flying over Victoria Peak and the government buildings, was replaced with the rising sun. Yet beneath the surface, resistance simmered. Local Chinese communities, often caught between loyalty to the colony and fear of the occupiers, engaged in clandestine support for prisoners and sporadic acts of defiance. In the years following the occupation, Hong Kong's residents faced hardship and repression. Food shortages persisted, forced labor was imposed, and arbitrary executions maintained fear. Yet the memory of the defenders' bravery did not fade. Stories of the Canadians who held Wong Nai Chung Gap, of the Indian and British soldiers who repelled wave after wave of attackers, and of civilians who risked death to help their neighbors were preserved in secret journals, oral histories, and letters sent abroad. The city's spirit endured in quiet resistance, a testament to resilience under occupation. When the war ended in 1945, Hong Kong was liberated, but the city it returned to was not the one that had fallen in December 1941. Buildings needed rebuilding, infrastructure repaired, and the wounds of trauma addressed. Survivors returned from imprisonment, bringing with them stories of suffering, heroism, and endurance. Families were reunited, though many remained fractured by loss. The Canadians, British, and Indian soldiers who had been captured were welcomed back as heroes, their courage recognized even in the shadow of defeat. Memorials were erected, cemeteries maintained, and history recorded. The sacrifice of those who fought in Hong Kong became part of the broader narrative of World War II. For historians, the fall of Hong Kong illustrated the speed and effectiveness of Japan's early war strategy, the vulnerabilities of colonial outposts, and the human cost of resistance against overwhelming force. For the public, it became a story of courage, loss, and resilience, the ultimate testament to those who faced the impossible and did not yield. Yet beyond the statistics and official accounts, the human element remained haunting. Survivors carried scars of fear, hunger, and loss. Children who had hidden in bombed basements remembered the screams of neighbors and the fires that consumed their neighborhoods. Soldiers recounted the smell of smoke and blood mingling with the salt of the harbor. Families told tales of separation, of relatives lost to bombs, bullets, or forced labor. Each story added a layer to the collective memory of the city, a mosaic of grief, courage, and endurance. Hong Kong had endured 2 weeks of hellfire, 2 weeks where every street, building, and hillside was contested in bloody struggle. It had fallen, but its defenders had carved their names into history. The rising sun had triumphed in December 1941, yet the story of Hong Kong was not one of surrender in spirit. The courage of soldiers, the resilience of civilians, and the quiet acts of defiance created a legacy that could not be erased by occupation or time. In the decades that followed, Hong Kong rebuilt itself. Skyscrapers rose from rubble, streets once filled with the sounds of shellfire returned to the hum of commerce and life. But the memories remained embedded in the city's consciousness. Commemorations, books, and oral histories kept the memory alive. Veterans returned for ceremonies at cemeteries and memorials, telling young generations about courage under impossible odds. Their stories became lessons in resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity could endure. The fall of Hong Kong was not just a military event, it was a human tragedy and a testament to endurance. For 14 days, ordinary men and women faced extraordinary violence. They fought, survived, and persevered against an empire's might. They endured bombings, artillery, starvation, and the terror of an invading force. Many perished, many were wounded, but their legacy outlived the destruction. From the ruins of Hong Kong emerged a story of defiance. The defenders' bravery became a symbol for all who resisted oppression. The civilians' endurance became a testament to the strength of communities under siege, and the city itself, scarred but unbroken, became a living monument to those who paid the ultimate price in December 1941. In remembering Hong Kong's last stand, we honor not just soldiers and officers, but the ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. We remember the families torn apart, the children who grew up too fast, and the courage that refused to yield even when hope seemed impossible. The story of Hong Kong in December 1941 is a story of humanity tested, of spirit unbroken, and of the enduring legacy of those who fought and suffered. Even today, when the wind sweeps across the harbor, some say it carries whispers of the past, the echoes of soldiers and civilians who stood their ground. The city may have fallen, but its spirit endured, and through its survival and the remembrance of those who gave everything, Hong Kong stands as a testament to courage against overwhelming odds. Until next time, stay safe and see you in the next history video.